JPMorgan strikes back, saying that the U.S. government was a lot more involved with Jeffrey Epstein than they let on. We're going to take a look at this new filing that came out from the bank, pointing the fingers in a very aggressive motion that does have some nice redactions in there, saying that officials on the Virgin Islands were working with Epstein to facilitate what he was doing. And the bank is saying, look, you're blaming us for being his financial bank, for helping him move millions of dollars around and transact in his schemes. But what were you doing, government? You were more involved than we are. And so the finger pointing starts, and it is very interesting to see the U.S. government be put on their heels by a major bank. But before we get into that, the AP had new details surrounding Epstein's alleged death. Here's what they write. They got documents, and they say that Epstein's last days included talk of calling his dead mom and a letter to an abusive doctor. Here's the update. They tell us that 2 weeks before ending his life, if you believe that for a minute, Epstein sat in the corner of his Manhattan jail cell with his hands over his ears, desperate to muffle the sound of a toilet that wouldn't stop running. Epstein was agitated, unable to sleep. Jail officials observed in records newly obtained by the Associated Press following things. They said Epstein called himself a coward, complained that he was struggling to adapt to life behind bars after his arrest. The disgraced financier was under psychological observation at the time for a suicide attempt just days earlier that left his neck bruised and scraped. So there was an attempt, they say. Yet even after a 31-hour stint on suicide watch, Epstein insisted he wasn't suicidal, telling the jail psychologist that he had a wonderful life and would be crazy to end it. But later, Epstein was dead. August 10th, 2019. Here are some documents. You see here it says, Friday, August 9th, inmate departs. Inmate Epstein arrives in the attorney conference. He's visited by attorneys. Inmate Epstein departs the attorney's office and returns. He's provided a social call. Epstein's in good spirits. Nothing unusual happening here. Saturday, August 10th. This is the date before. So Friday, August 9th, we have check-ins. Inmate Reyes Efren goes to court. He left the cell. Epstein has an attorney conference in the morning. He leaves the attorney conference at 6:45, 7 p.m. He has a social call. He's in good spirits. That's the day before. Day of the incident, 6:33 a.m. Somebody's name is activated by the SHU. Staff found Epstein unresponsive in his cell. Staff reported to the bedside of an inmate and attempted to wake him. Control announced medical emergency, CPR initiated bright and early. Medical staff on duty. CPR already in progress as staff arrives. Skipper Scott was notified. EMS arrived 6:45, so just over 10 minutes later. Inmate Epstein is intubated, given 3 rounds in epinephrine, IV access started, IO initiated, no pulse found, no shock advised. Inmate prepared for transport to local hospital. Institution placed on modified operations at 7 a.m. 7:10 EMS departs over to the hospital called Beekman. 7:19 USMS notified, others notified, more people show up at the institution. PIO notified of the incident by the warden. 7:36 ER physician reports Epstein is dead. Official time of death. FBI is notified 8:34. Assistant U.S. Attorney's Office notified 9 a.m. Somebody named C. Edge arrives at the institution. What? He's dead? They get over there. Then we get Judge Berman's notified. Next of kin, brother was notified. Press release goes out 11:12 a.m. on Saturday. Crisis support team is activated. FBI gets there at 12:19. They arrive at the special housing unit 1:35. Crisis support team is debriefed. FBI's there till about 3:45. They depart back to New York. Sunday, they resume normal operations. Another agent arrives, and others depart. Monday, FBI's back on scene. Tuesday, we've got North regional directors are there. And then the rest of this is about the investigation. FBI conducts their investigation, and it continues on. So now, nearly 4 years later, the AP has obtained more than 4,000 pages of documents. They include detailed psychological reconstructions, as well as his health history, reports, emails, and memos. They give us a summary. They say, taken together, the stories, the documents that the AP obtained on Thursday provide the most complete accounting to date of his detention and death. The records help to dispel the many conspiracy theories surrounding his suicide, underscoring how fundamental failings at Bureau of Prisons, like staffing shortages, contributed to his death. And like the cameras were off, the security guard fell asleep, the whole thing. It's like a scene out of a Netflix series. Now, they shed new light on the muddled response. In one email, a prosecutor involved in the criminal case complained about the lack of information in the critical hours after the death. One prosecutor says, wrote, it was frankly unbelievable that the agency was issuing public press releases before telling us basic information so we can relay it to his attorneys who can relay it to his family. So they wanted him dead. They wanted the media to know he was dead before they even processed it. In another email, high-ranking Bureau of Prisons officials made a spurious suggestion to the agency's director that news reporters must have been paying jail employees for information because they were reporting the details of the agency's failings. Here's Suicide Watch log, July 23, 2019. It says, document your observations. Inmate was brought down to the suicide cell. Inmates lying on bed. Inmates sitting on bed talking. So this is somebody monitoring Epstein every 15 minutes. 1:45, brought down. 1:45 a.m., lying on bed. 2 a.m., sitting on bed. 2:15, redacted. 2:30, inmate sitting on bed trying to remember what happened after what happened at 2:15, which was redacted. We don't know. 2:45, sitting on bed. 2:03, sitting on bed. 3:15, Lieutenant so-and-so takes pictures. And then he's just sitting at the bed, which is, I guess, what you do. From 3:30 all the way to 4:15, talks to somebody at the door, 4:30, and then he's no longer on suicide watch, 7 a.m. He's standing at the door, and somebody stopped monitoring him, I guess. Provided a fresh window into Epstein's behavior. He also sent a letter to Nassar, who was convicted of abusing athletes on the soccer team. He finds a buddy who also abuses young girls. He's like, hey, how's your cell? What's going on over there? The night before Epstein's death, he excused himself from a meeting with his lawyers to make a telephone call to his family. According to a memo from a unit manager, Epstein told a jail employee that he was calling his mother, who'd been dead for 15 years at that point. Yeah, and they blame his death on seriously reduced staffing levels, improper or lack of training, and follow-up and oversight. So new details on that, and we'll continue to see if we learn more about who his clients were and who was responsible for enabling him for all of the many years. But something else is happening now, because the bank, JPMorgan Chase, is now being blamed for being the financial institution that helped Epstein do his misdeeds, moving millions of dollars around, providing donos. You know, he was flying people all over the place on private jets. He had tons of money. Nobody really knew where it came from. But the government from the Virgin Islands has sued JPMorgan Chase and said, you were managing his money. You were enabling all of this. But something interesting has happened. JPMorgan is not sitting back and just taking it. No, they're responding. And they submitted this back against the U.S. government. This is JPMorgan Chase's opposition to the government's attempt to strike their defenses. So JPMorgan said, we have defenses. The government says, no, you don't. They're responding saying, yes, we do. And we're going to take a look at the language in here, which is very interesting. Here's their preliminary statement. They say that plaintiff government, which is suing JPMorgan, the government of the Virgin Islands of the United States, they say is complicit in the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein. The U.S. Virgin Islands government is complicit in the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein. They say Epstein could have lived anywhere in the world, but he chose you, the Virgin Islands. Discovery obtained in this case reveals why. For 2 decades, Epstein maintained quid pro quo relationships with the U.S. Virgin Islands' highest ranking officials. He gave them money, advice, influence, and favors. And in exchange, the officials shielded and even rewarded him, granting him more than some amount of millions in tax incentives. We don't know what that is. Looks like double digits. And they also gave him this redacted. Looking the other way when he walked through the U.S. Virgin Islands airports, accompanied by girls and young women. And even this something disgusting. Also, they let him do this disgusting thing, and this disgusting thing over here, and this disgusting thing on this sentence. For 2 decades, and for long after JPMorgan Chase exited Epstein as a client, they said, we can't work with you anymore. The entity that most directly failed to protect public safety and most actively facilitated and benefited Epstein's activity, the criminal activity, was the government of the Virgin Islands itself. Not us. Though the U.S. Virgin Islands government hopes to shroud itself in various exemptions, it is a plaintiff in a civil litigation like any other. You can sue us and we're going to make our claims right back at you. Tellingly, the Virgin Islands motion seeks to strike only those specific defenses that threaten to expose its relationship with Epstein. So JP says, we've got affirmative defenses, which is that basically you guys were doing the things that you're claiming we're doing, and they're trying to strike those defenses. They say that's very very convenient. The only things that you say we can't defend ourselves on are when we are implicating you as being more responsible than we are. Chase says the law affords defendants equitable defenses to protect them against precisely this sort of one-sided presentation of the evidence, and so deny their motion. They say that discovery in this case has been ongoing, but has established at least the following details. In 2009, upon his release from prison for procuring a minor, Epstein sought to arrange for his supervision of his parole to be transferred to the Virgin Islands. He registered with the Virgin Islands as an offender and maintained his primary residence there. They put him under Virgin Island law enforcement under their direct jurisdiction and supervision. The decades-long quid pro quo between Epstein and the Virgin Island U.S. government took three forms. First, high-ranking U.S. Virgin Islands officials spent years courting and gladly accepting Epstein's influence in the form of gifts, favors, political donations. The U.S. Virgin Islands granted Epstein, secondly, preferential treatment in the form of more than blank millions or million in tax incentives, among other benefits. And third, most troublingly, the U.S. Virgin Islands protected Epstein, fostering the perfect conditions for Epstein's criminal conduct to continue undetected. Rather than stop him, they helped him. More details. They say he originally courted these officials with gifts, money, and favors, and all of them gladly accepted. He did this in three ways. He gave money to the government itself. In February 2017, he wrote to the First Lady, Cecile de Jong, referencing her husband, the governor. He said, the Virgin Island government is desperate for cash. Does John know of any asset that I can use as collateral, islands, etc.? The amount to be collateralized was $50 million. The First Lady replied, said, I'll get a list of the government properties. Okay, so Epstein is saying, I'll give you a loan of $50 million. Yeah, and Drifter is right about this. This could say billion. This could say billion. That could be a B there. That could be a B, huh? It could be a B. Woo! That's a good call on that one, Drifter. Yeah, you're right. Says, as this continues, so this one was for $50 million. So the amount to be collateralized was $50 million. I'll give you a $50 million loan in exchange for property. Epstein, and the First Lady is like, let me see what I've got available for you. Let me check our Zillow account. What do we have here? Epstein also gave money to the U.S. Virgin Islands Department of Planning. He directed a $25,000 check to be cut from his company. Not only did they take the money, but they actively facilitated his apparent preference to donate to a school library for schools. If you prefer to donate to school libraries, I can connect you with a commissioner for education, helping Epstein's money go to local schools. Perfect. He had also given apparently $25,000 to the Home for Girls in St. Croix. Dropped another $25,000 there. Epstein, who was jailed for soliciting girls as young as 14, gave gifts to school pupils and financed events for young children, facilitated by the U.S. Virgin Islands. He also worked with now current U.S. Governor Albert Bryan, facilitating donations to schools and Little Leagues. $50,000 for that. $30,000 goes to the Virgin Islands Little League. He also transferred payments, among others, to this thing and to this thing. Epstein made these payments to this despite knowing they risked provoking suspicion. In 2012, he wrote to the First Lady about funding a training program. Said, I'd like to support these things. But in the past, it was looked upon with suspicion. She responds, what do you mean, like suspicion locally? My thought was that this would be okay because it's specifically homicide training. To avoid leaving a written record, he responds, he says, face to face. Epstein also gave money directly to politicians. He supported, hey, Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett, you know her, who successfully ran to be a delegate to Congress. She's the so-called journalist one. Epstein personally gave the maximum amount to Plaskett's campaigns over multiple election cycles. He asked that his contributions be kept secret. He directed others to contribute as well. He says, we would have a friend in Stacey. Wow. That's this woman right here. American politician, commentator, non-voting delegate from the Virgin Islands. And we've seen her in many hearings. She's very aggressive and she says things to Matt Taibbi like, oh, you so-called journalists, stuff like that. So apparently a big friend of Epstein. Isn't that fun? Third, Epstein also funneled money via his business entities, went to U.S. Virgin Island Governor Kenneth Mapp. Celestino White also wished to see Epstein, asking Epstein from which entity he wanted to donate to. $15,000 donos, $10,000 donos, $25,000 private gift to all of these politicians. Primary bankroller, the person who he would work through, was First Lady de Jong. She drove donations from Epstein to support her husband and his allies. A lot of money. Somebody else got $200,000. She got $200,000 from Epstein. Epstein paid her child's tuition. The children of the sitting governor, DeJong, including when he was the sitting U.S. Virgin Islands governor. He paid for their tuition, and he also offered to fund Governor DeJong's defense in the governor's criminal case. Says, I'll play any role in this you guys like. I can lend John the money, so he immediately has it. I would be gladly to be on the phone anonymous with the prosecutor offering suggestions. $25 a year for 20 years, income tax now, so on. He's going to be moving the money around. They say, lest there be no doubt, Epstein's goal was to gain influence. First Lady DeJong explicitly advised Epstein on how to buy control of the political class. She told him, give wide, but give nominal support, then strongly support the winner of the primary. They explored paying monthly retainers to politicians to ensure their loyalty and access. Can we just give him like a monthly $5,000, $10,000 and just buy them? He basically owned the whole island, is what it sounds like. They considered putting Celestino White on some sort of monthly retainer, and they paid returns on this stuff. All this money went back, and then we start to see some major redactions. Insane. Let's see what they're asking for in conclusion. So for the foregoing reasons, they say this court should deny the Virgin Islands motion and strike their affirmative defenses submitted by Felicia Ellsworth, lawyers for JPMorgan Chase. And what an absolutely disgusting situation where Epstein was so involved with the government that he was literally talking about paying them monthly retainers to buy off the politicians. Unbelievable. Now, apparently there is also some finger pointing going on inside of JPMorgan. So now the executives are blaming each other over keeping Epstein. Depositions are happening, and current officials are blaming one another for allowing convicted trafficker Epstein to remain a client. CEO Jamie Dimon said in a deposition last week that the bank's general counsel, Stephen Cutler, was ultimately responsible for deciding whether to retain Epstein's accounts. They were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But according to other material, Cutler, in his own deposition, said that two executives who led JP Morgan's division, Jess Staley and Mary Erdowas, were responsible for removing Epstein. And Erdowas, in her deposition in March, said the bank retained Epstein because Staley vouched for him. So everybody's pointing fingers at each other. Everybody was involved in this. They all know what was going on. The banks did, the executives did, the media did, people like Reid Hoffman did, U.S. Virgin Islands did, Stacey Plaskett did, First Lady of the Virgin Islands did, but they all covered it up. Why? They all allowed it to happen. And Epstein had already pled guilty, and they continued to collaborate with him. And now they all are saying mea culpa. So the finger pointing will continue as all of these monsters try to save their own skin. And of course, the lawsuit will continue forward. I got to tell you, though, I do like the fact that they're not holding back. The bank should be calling out the government because the government is as complicit as the bank was. And as they continue to fight with each other, we are the beneficiaries. We get to see this nefarious finally exposed on display. And of course, we will continue to cover it.